Go ahead and go. I don't think we need an AI companion today.
Oh, that just adds a whole other level.
It does. It sure does. We'll give everybody maybe just a minute or two to see if anybody else can join us live. Um, Otherwise, we will get started. I'll aim for 105.
Anybody here want to share? Are you coming for a specific reason, specific questions you might have? No? Just gathering information, taking it all in. How
Love
old are
it.
your children?
I have a son who's 4 years and a half.
Okay.
So yeah, I want to learn how to make him more confident. He's very open at home, but when we are out, he's a bit
Oh,
quieter.
okay.
Mhm.
You'll be happy to know that's very normal.
Okay. Okay.
That's good to know. I have
Yeah.
Yeah.
a almost 5-year-old
Okay.
daughter and then a 2-year-old as well. And I think also like as a girl, I know I hate to say that, but like sometimes I want to make sure that, they are very confident because you never know what's going to happen in the wider world to make you feel otherwise, etc. So it's very like important to me.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
In my case, I have a 2 years old, and she's also a girl, and I feel like a Mahaki. Like as women, we sometimes lose with society. Loud is so loud sometimes, and we lose self-esteem, confidence, easier than men sometimes. Things
Oh,
are changing right now, but I know it's more challenging for women.
yeah, it certainly can be. It's different.
Okay, so it's 105. So why don't we just go ahead and get started, even just based off of those opening ideas? I think this is going to be a really, really wonderful conversation. When I was offered the opportunity to be a part of this today, I jumped at it. I have an 8-year-old at home, and I think that this is a topic that no matter what age your children are, we can all relate to wanting to build these skills and development with our children. So, first and foremost, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to be here today. I know as caregivers and parents and grown-ups, we are pulled in a lot of different directions. And so it's really not lost on me that you would take the time to join us here today. So thank you so much for doing that. Just so I don't lose sight of it, I want to remind everybody that we do have still our winter calendar is up and it is online and you're able to register. We still have a few other workshops that are coming up between now and the end of March. Nikki will be back again next month as well too. So I'll put the link in the chat if you want to check those out. We also have a workshop that's happening next week in person. And we're going to be talking about sleep solutions. And again, it's applicable to all different ages as well too. So please feel free to check those out. And of course, if you ever have topics, suggestions, or themes that you're looking for information or content on, please don't be shy. Reach out to us. I'll put my email address in the chat as well too. We're always looking for content because we want to make sure that we're being responsive to your parenting and caregiving journey, right? So if we don't know what the information is that you're looking for, we're just making educated guesses. So please use your voice and share with us. Okay. Awesome. So I'm going to pass it over to Nikki, our talented facilitator today. She is a wealth of knowledge. No pressure, Nikki.
Yeah, seriously. Come on now.
But really, we're just really thrilled to have her with us. She's got wonderful insights on this topic. So thank you so much, Nikki.
Thank you, Lisa. Um, and I will extend my thank yous as well for taking the time. It's not easy when you've got young children to carve out a bit of time, and it's important. Hopefully you carve out a little bit of that that's not just about parenting, but also about some other things that you might like to do in your life besides parenting. They can be all consuming, those kids. So as Lisa said, my name is Nikki. I worked for OPCC for 20 years. I retired almost 5 years ago now. I was the parent educator there for 18 years, and then I was actually the Lisa for the last 2 years of my of my tenure there. I was the manager of the early on programs. So, and my career prior to that was 20 years in childcare. So I worked for the Hamilton Burlington Y for 17 years, and then I ran my own daycare in my own home for almost 4 years. So I do come with at least some experience with kids and families. I have three grown children. They're 31, oh God, 31, 38, and 40. I don't know how I have a 40-year-old now. It just boggles my mind all the time. And then my baby's 31. And I have five grandchildren ranging from the ages of 5 to almost 18. So my grandchildren are my do-overs. They are the ones that I get to practice on for all the things I messed up when I was parenting. You get to try again when you have grandkids. They are the reward for your parenting investment. So you've got a ways to go. Your kids are young, but just keep that in mind. Hopefully one day you'll be grandparents as well. It really is a gift to have those grandkids in your life. So they're not half as exhausting and as stressful as your own children. So um, so we're going to talk today a little bit about, and it is going to be a little bit, we could do hours on each of these topics. So to combine all three, it makes sense. But I'll really just touch on a little bit of each of them. They are very intertwined. If you've got questions, pop them into the chat. And if there's enough questions, Lisa can stop us partway through or when it makes sense. And we can answer some questions as we go, or we can wait till the end if there's, if there's other questions that come up. So how's that sound? We good? All right. So I'm going to try. This is always a try to share my screen so that you've got a visual to work from. Come on. There we go. Okay. So according to this, it says you can see. I have no idea how to get me in a corner because I know sometimes people like to see I know I like to see the presenter when they're presenting, but I have no idea how to do that. And I'm scared if I start messing around, I'm going to lose you guys. So we will work on it this way. So the first thing I thought we should probably sort of start this with is, why is resilience, confidence, and self-esteem important? And really, it's a fairly simple answer. They're complicated ideas, but it's a fairly simple answer. They are the foundation to success. They're also the foundation, for the most part, to long-term happiness, and most particularly, I think, this day and age, health, both physical and mental health. They are protective factors for mental health, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go along. And I feel like there's a lot of barriers these days for kids. There's a lot of children struggling with these things. And I think at some point we need to ask ourselves why that is and what can we do about it as parents and caregivers, teachers, and all those important people in children's lives. Parents need to remember that they have enormous influence over their children. And you are your first and most important teachers for your kids. So what you say and do matters. And because we don't have a lot of time with our children anymore, as much as we used to when women stayed home and all of that, we have to optimize the time that we have, I think, with our children and really prioritize what we're going to do with the limited time we have now that they're in school and daycare and sometimes in a lot of activities and things like that. So lots of things always to think about. So we'll start with resiliency. Resiliency refers to a child's ability to cope with challenges and problems. When things don't go their way, how do they respond to that? Can they we often refer to it as bouncing back. Can they bounce back fairly quickly and sort of evaluate and maybe change things and go on, or do they get kind of stuck um, and have a hard time moving past some of the adversities that might come up? And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those adversities. We have to remember that a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old's adversity is not the same as ours. And sometimes I think we undermine um, the child's experience and say, oh, that's not a big deal. It's just stop. And it's not a big deal to us. We've come through it. We've practiced it a number of times. For a young child, these are experiences that are either very new or they haven't mastered yet. So for the child, it is a big deal. So we do have to respect the fact that what may not seem like a catastrophic thing, I can't have the blue cup. For us, it's like, oh, for heaven's sakes, really? And for children, that can be a big deal. And so I think we need to sort of recognize and respect that those things can be difficult and hard for children. And it's those little things that sort of resiliency comes from. It doesn't have to be big catastrophic challenges and adversity, but children do need challenges and adversity in order to develop all of these skills. Because some people refer to it as sort of, curling or bubble wrapping or whatever, where curling, we sweep all the problems away as we go. And, bubble wrapping is pretty self-explanatory. But if children don't get to experience, particularly the small things when they're small, and then the problems and adversities get bigger as children get bigger, if they don't get to experience those, then when something does come up that you can't sort of brush out of the way or protect them from, they are at a complete loss about what to do. And that can be really, really hard for children because they haven't had the chance to build those skills. So basically what I'm going to do is go through these 3 topics. We're going to talk a little bit about what it looks like when children don't have these things, and then what it can look like when they do, and then sort of what we can do as adults and caregivers to help support children to develop these skills. So I think let's look at the important context first, because it is important to realize that because a child there's a lot of reasons that children may not look or be resilient. So we have to take all of that it's about context. We have to take care of all of those things and think about those things before we start to worry. And again, children are very much under construction till they're from a brain development perspective, in their mid to late 20s. So when you've got a 2 or a 4 or 5 or 6-year-old, they are still very, very immature and young in their development. So when children look like they're not resilient, it can be a number of things. Temperament is a big one. Because if you have a very intense child, for example, and you look at this first sign, strong reactions to small problems. Well, if you have a very intense, highly intense child, they're going to have strong reactions to every problem, big, small. Sometimes it can be hard to tell the difference. So your child's temperament can play a big role in how you interpret some of their reactions to things. Certainly their age. So we look at, I call them terrific twos because toddlers are my favorite age group. But lots of people, the old adage, terrible twos, they are prone to big emotional outbursts and tantrums and things like that. That doesn't mean they're not resilient. It means they're 2. So those kinds of things are, this list is not an all-encompassing list, I'm sure, but parenting styles, stress is a huge one. Stress can get in the way of all of these things. So we really need to think about that, and not just stress in the home, but stress at school, parent stress, stress levels, things like that. Any traumas or major life changes can also change the resiliency of a child, often temporarily. And if there are learning or developmental differences. And again, those aren't, it's not a complete list, but just give you an idea that there are exceptions to every rule. So if you see some of these things in your child and they're 2, don't go panicking and running off to somebody and, having bad dreams about how your child's not resilient. Resiliency is learned. We're not born necessarily with resiliency. So through experiences, children learn to be resilient. So that's really great news that this is a skill that they can learn, and we can certainly help them along the way. So big reactions to small problems. Some people call it dramatic. Some people call it overreacting, whatever. Avoiding challenges. So sometimes children who are not resilient don't like to do things that they find challenging, that might be hard, because they're not necessarily of sort of a persevering kind of, um, they don't have the ability to persevere through things and have some of the feelings sometimes that come along with being challenged, right? Frustration, those kinds of things. High sensitivity to criticism or failure. So that can again be a bit of a temperament thing. So highly sensitive children are often very sensitive to criticism and failure, as are children who are criticized and consistently by people around them. That can also create a sensitivity. They have trouble handling change. So non-resilient children don't like to do things differently. If you always do something that the same time all the time, and all of a sudden you do something else, it can throw them off. Or if you plan a picnic for the next day and it rains, the non-resilient child may have trouble adapting to the idea that we can't go on that picnic, even though they can clearly see it's raining outside. So just that difficulty switching over and changing plans. Difficulty regulating emotions. Again, this can be a very temperamental and age-related thing as well. But resiliency requires emotional regulation, to be able to sort of stop yourself, think about things, pull yourself together, those kinds of things. And then social struggles, as well can be a sign of a lack of resiliency. We underestimate what social skills require from children. They have to pivot very quickly. They have to deal with different personalities and different situations, and often in the moment, on the fly. They often don't have a lot of time to think about things. So as adults, again, we may underestimate how difficult social lives of children are, and particularly have become with, as they get older, social media and things like that. So social struggles can be a real struggle. And then excessive dependence on adults. And this is a bit of a tricky one, because I think we live in a culture that really wants to promote independence in children. And there can be a lot of problems with that, because this independence has to be appropriate. So when we talk about dependence on adults, there's an appropriate amount of dependence as well. And often our culture doesn't recognize that dependence is actually the road that children need to take to get to independence. If they're pushed into independence too quickly, then it hinders their development. So we want children to be dependent on their adults, but there is a point where it's excessive. There is a point where they rely too heavily on adults. Therefore, they're not sort of testing the adversity and those other things that they might need. So children who are highly resistant, we often think of them as tough, and they're not. These are not children who are tough or just they're not affected by things around them. They still have all those feelings, but they are able to recover and adapt, and again, stop and think and pull themselves together and regulate. And you can't think until you're regulated. So until children get those emotions back in check, they're unable to think. So when we, for example, have a child who's tantruming and we're trying to reason with them, it's really a moot point, because the emotional brain has kicked in, the thinking brain is on vacation, and until that emotional brain calms down, the thinking brain can't come back on. So highly resilient children are able to do that shift those brain mechanisms from one to the other, calm themselves down, or accept help from somebody else when they're very young to calm down, so that then they can start to think and problem solve. So these are not children that don't, never cry. Of course they cry. All children cry. They struggle. They're not always confident. Resilient children aren't always confident. And we'll talk about confidence next. they still need support. And resiliency, like I said, is learned and built. It's not, you're not sort of not born with it. And we have again a world that tests our children's resiliency a lot. So when we look at what does a highly resilient child look like, they recover from upset. So when they get upset, again, they're able to pull themselves together, able to recover fairly quickly. Again, this depends on the child's age, their temperament, how much support they're getting from adults, all those kinds of things. But generally, they're not going on and on for hours or holding on to things for days. They're willing to try. If something doesn't work out, they're willing to go back and try it again. Doesn't mean they're willing to try it right in that moment, but maybe they'll go back after they've calmed down in a half hour and say, okay, I'm going to try and do that again. Um, so their willingness to realize that they're not catastrophic thinkers. It's not that always forever kind of thinking where I can't do it once, so therefore I can never do it, right? That's not a resilient mindset. They're very flexible in their thinking. They can think about different alternatives and different reasons for things, stuff like that. They can name and express feelings. So they can recognize feelings within themselves and often not in those moments where they're having the feelings, because that, again, that thinking brain shuts off. The thinking brain is the language center. Often children don't have the language when they're in an emotional state because that language center is shut off. But when they've calmed down, you can talk to them and say, so how were you feeling that day? And, or that time. And they can name those things and talk about them. The social lives and social interactions are positive. So they're able to build and more importantly, maintain friendships. Children don't need a lot of friends. They need good friends. Um, so it's not like we're collecting marbles. Friendships are important and intimate things. So even if your child is a bit of an introvert and only has one or two good friends, that's plenty to you know, keep us going. We don't need a ton of friends. And in fact, a ton of friends can complicate life greatly, especially when you're little. They're showing healthy independence. So again, this is that healthy piece, that appropriate independence. So when you've got 2-year-olds who are, trying to do everything is they're pushing you away and saying, me do it, I do it. That's appropriate. Now, me do it, I do it, make dinner is not an appropriate independence, but them wanting to do things like put their own shoes on and things like that, those are important and healthy independence stages. So we want to make sure that the independence that we're allowing our children to have and we're fostering is appropriate for the age that the child has. We have systems in place that are putting a lot of expectation for children's independence long before it's actually appropriate developmentally, especially around the sort of social emotional stuff. We put them into groups when they're very young and expect that they're just going to know what to do and don't need a lot of support. And that is not really developmentally where they're at. They still need a lot of adult support to figure out these social interactions. Over time, they can start to solve problems. And one of the best things you can do with older children is let them come up with solutions for their own problems, because a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old will come up with 4-year-old or 5-year-old solutions that make sense to them. Sometimes our solutions make no sense to children because we're thinking as adults and the problem is a child problem. And they generally have a positive view of themselves and of sort of the world and their friends and those kinds of things. So they're generally kind of a positive outlook on things. So some of the things that we can do to help to foster resiliency, making connections. So again, we want to create situations where children have some of these challenges and adversity. And relationships are a great way to do this because there's always, anytime you get a group of kids together, there's going to be adversity. There's going to be fights over toys. There's going to be, you're not coming to my party. There's going to be, I'm her friend, not you, because kids can't share developmentally until a certain point. So there are lots of opportunities when your child is interacting, again, with adult support, to learn how to build relationships, to experience some of these small adversities, and to start to develop an empathy for others, which is empathy is a huge need for resiliency as well as confidence and self-esteem. So we want to make sure that we're exposing our children to connections, but not too many. So when you've got children in school or daycare all day, they probably don't need, many of them, they probably don't need a ton of other activities that involve big groups, because again, it can be complicated. So they may do better with a one-on-one play date, or, you know, a small group or something like that, if they're particularly in big groups all day long, because that can be very exhausting and stressful for kids and overwhelm them. Teaching emotional awareness. So we want to help kids, we want to give kids the words and the language and help them have those things. So we're not going to tell them how they feel. We're going to ask them, but we're going to talk a lot throughout the day, all day long, about feelings. When you've got a feeling, you're going to express it. You know what? I'm feeling really happy today. You know what? I'm kind of tired today. You know what? I'm really, you know, I can't get this jar open. I am so frustrated. I think I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to step away from it. So if you narrate and talk your way through the day, there are tons of opportunities to model resilience, to model emotional language, to help kids see that everybody has feelings. And there are no good or bad feelings. There's good and bad reactions to feelings, perhaps. If you're angry, being angry in and of itself is not bad. Throwing something may not be an appropriate reaction, but that's about the reaction. That's not about the feeling. So we want to be careful that we're not labeling feelings or making kids feel like certain feelings are good or bad or appropriate and not appropriate. It's the reaction to the feelings that sometimes can be problematic. Again, we want to model optimism and confidence. So we're talking our way through those days. We're not saying, oh my God, my hair's a mess today. I feel like this, you know, I just don't want those kinds of things. Model something, but not necessarily optimism. Again, when we're struggling with something very simple, we don't want to put adult problems onto our kids. So I'm talking about, like I said, just narrating the day. This jar is really hard to open. I know I can do it. What do I need to do? I just need to put it down for a minute and take a breath, and then I'll try it again. Or I need to get this tool so I can. And your kids, don't kid yourself, they're watching and listening to you all the time. Even if they're focused on something else, you're in the background and they're taking it all in. So you want to model this optimistic, I can do this, resilient, confident kind of behavior, so that they can see you doing it, because children want to emulate the adults they're attached to. That's the whole way we get kids to grow up to be adults, is to orient them to the adults that they're attached to, so that they want to be like you. So it's a really important thing to think about when you're modeling things for your kids. Structure and routines gives predictability, gives children a sense of safety, gives kids an opportunity to say, okay, I know this is coming. They can think ahead, which is part of resiliency. They can think ahead about a situation if there's a routine, you know, and how, you know, I'm going to have to brush my teeth soon. I don't like to brush my teeth. What can I do? All this kind of stuff. So maintaining routines that are consistent, but not rigid. I mean, life happens, things, you know, grandma comes to visit. You're not going to, you know, not let your child see grandma. I speak as a grandma. You know, because grandma's not coming into town till 8 o'clock at night and 7:30 is bedtime. So you need to be a bit flexible when certain things come up, but a fairly consistent routine is helpful. The growth mindset, there's been a lot of stuff that's come out on that. So it gets rid of that catastrophic thinking. It's what can we do next? It's not about outcomes. If you've got children in school and report card day is coming, it's not about the A, the B, or the C. It's about, wow, you tried your hardest. Or I saw when you did that project, it was, you know, you spent a lot of time on that. So we're wanting to give kids feedback about what we see in the journey. It's kind of that saying, you know, it's the journey, not the destination. That's the growth mindset. So that it's not just about you have to get to X And then what? It's done. So now I've got an A. Where do I go from here? So it's just again that idea that, when we approach things with the journey, there's always room for growth and change. We want to help children um, be involved in tasks, and when they're old enough, volunteer things. Um, Chores are good for children. Don't necessarily have to pay them. It's just part of being the family. But there can be extra chores and things. But children like to feel useful. Children like meaningful things to do. And that can help build skills that again help build this resiliency. Um, and taking lots of breaks. Being a child is tiring work. Um, Believe it or not, more tiring for them than you. So teaching children to manage stress, talking again about feelings, stepping back and just saying, okay, you know, it's time to just take a break. And whether you put those into your routine or whether you just sort of decide it's a rough day. So you know what, we're not going to go to swimming lessons today because, nobody's in the mood and we just need some family time together because that grounds children when they can be with their families. So being willing and able and recognizing that taking breaks it's not a bad thing. It's actually a very, very good thing. So do we have any questions, Lisa?
No questions in the chat, but people are welcome to hop on their mics as well too, if that brought up any thoughts.
Sometimes I'm going to move to confidence. So sometimes it's just good to take a couple of seconds it's a lot of information to process. I understand that. So I'm glad this is being recorded.
Um, Not sure if this might be covered later on, but how do we motivate them when after a failure? Obviously, a failure, I don't know, a small thing for a 4-year-old that
That,
like,
that is a great question because motivation, it's a little bit of all of these things, but it's funny how we as adults think that it's our job to motivate our children. And really what we want to do is think about how can we get children to be motivated on their own because motivation is not an external thing, it's an internal thing. It's like self-esteem. We talk about self-esteem. So it comes from within. So effective motivation comes from within. So we want to really think about it, sort of flip it on its head and wonder to ourselves, why is my child not motivated? And there's a gazillion reasons. Just if they're 4, you could ask them, why don't you want to do this? And once there's an environment of safety in in the family or at school or wherever, children are more than willing to express and talk about these things. It's when we get mad or we get dismissive or we're like we don't have time to listen or we ask questions and we don't want to hear the answers, those kinds of things will shut kids down. But if we can create an environment in a family where it's okay to say how you feel and talk about things without repercussions and fear of getting in trouble, it is shocking the insight that children can come up with even at 4 about what the problems are. So us needing to motivate our children is not the question. The question is, why is my child not motivated on his own? Can you give me an example of what you're thinking of?
for example, if he's building up some blocks and then one doesn't fit correctly. He
Okay.
tries a couple of times and then he's like, oh, no, I cannot do it. So I'm like, why not? Why don't you try different sides? And he's like, oh, no, no, I prefer to do this. And he moves on to a different um, game or thing. So he leaves that if he cannot make it.
Okay. So it may be, so you might want to talk about the feelings that come up. So this is really frustrating, all right? Or it can be really frustrating or, upsetting when things don't work the way you want them to. Looks like you need to take a break. Um, when we start, this is a bit of a double-edged sword, but I'm going to say it anyway. When we start offering solutions and suggestions to a child's problem, then it becomes ours. So we rob children of the opportunity to do the thinking part and the solving part and that resiliency piece that says, well, maybe once I get my feelings under control, which may be why he's walking away. And sometimes kids can't articulate these things. So you can ask kids questions, and if they say they don't know, often they don't because they don't have that much sort of internal dialogue and self-awareness yet when they're young. It's not to say you don't ask the question. But when we start making suggestions, it takes the opportunity away from children. So it's a hard thing for parents to do. And I'm going to talk about in a little bit, I'm going to talk about saying good job to kids because it's a similar kind of thing. What we say to kids inadvertently is, I know what to do. Here's my ideas. And it takes away from the child being able to come up with his own ideas, which is needed for the resiliency piece. So if a child walks away, they're probably doing it because they need to. If they don't come back to it, it could be that they've lost interest. It could be that they don't know what to do. So you can support them through that without taking over, without putting pressure on them. If it's a building a block, then don't tidy up those blocks at the end of the day. Just leave them there and just say to them, you know what, you were having such a great time doing blocks. I'm just going to leave those there until tomorrow. And maybe you'll come up with an idea about how you can make that work the way you want it to. So it respects the child's need for distance. It respects the child's need and materials to be able to go back to. And it says to the child, I trust that if you're interested, if you want to, you can go back. You can think about this. You can come up with a good idea and you can go back to it. So there's lots of underlying messages in that versus why don't you try this, this, and this? Do you see
Mhm.
the difference?
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking more, don't give up that easy. Try a bit harder. So maybe that's why I give some options. But okay, I'll leave it. I didn't see it as an option, him just leaving.
Yeah.
That's what I
Sometimes, well,
thought.
don't we all need to just sometimes walk away and come back and try something
Yeah.
later when we've had
Yeah.
time to think? We don't give kids enough time to think and process, I think is
Mhm.
part of the problem with being a kid these days. We expect them to be able to think as quickly as we do, and they don't have any of the experience that we do. How many times in your life have you built blocks or built something that requires the same skills? Hundreds, if not thousands of times. Your four-year-old's done it a few times.
Hmm.
So they don't think as fast as we do. And all of this stuff comes with experience. So when we sort of leave things open-ended, say, you know what? I think you can come up with a way to figure this out. And if you need my help, by all means, ask me. So you always want kids to know that you're there, but you
Mhm.
don't want to take over. And it may be days before a child comes back and tries it again. Right? And the more we push our agenda, the less likely they are to try it, to be honest with you. There's this phenomenon called counterwill that Dr. Gordon Neufeld talks about. And basically, it's an innate automatic response that we have, even as adults, to saying no and resisting if we feel like we're being forced, manipulated, or coerced. So when we say to a child, why don't you try this, this, and this, that feels like we're forcing them. It's not what we intend, but it is what the child feels. Um, so their automatic response is to say no, right? Even if they know it's a good idea or whatever, they're going to say no because this response that we have to being pushed is an automatic biological response. It has a function. It's meant to keep, back in the day, it's meant to keep kids safe. It's meant to keep kids resisting. That's why when we were introducing and somebody said, my child isn't very confident out in public and is very different inside. Children are not actually designed biologically to just go up to people and say, hi, how are you? They're supposed to be shy. They're supposed to hide behind you. So there's this whole biological phenomenon where if they're feeling forced, it's really meant to keep strangers from being able to just take them. Like kids are supposed to scream or yell or whatever if somebody that they don't know and trust is around them. So sometimes, unfortunately, that comes to play even with people like us, the parents and stuff, where, we do love them and it is safe, but there is an automatic response sometimes when kids feel like they're forced. So just give them time. And again, kids don't process as quickly. So sometimes coming back to try it again, it could be hours or days. And you can nudge, you can sit down and play with the blocks yourself and see if they join you. You could invite them, those kinds of things. But it's best not to sort of push too hard because again, that motivation has to be intrinsic. It has to come from inside. So your job is to keep it safe, to keep it encouraging, to keep it supportive, and it's their job to then figure out when they're willing to come back and try it again.
Okay, thank
Does
you.
that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Thank
Nikki, I think we have another question here too, Mathanji. I saw you maybe come off mute there for a second if you wanted to hop on.
Yeah,
Sure.
I just wanted to confirm and like play it back. I think what I'm hearing is when a child might give up or do something where you feel like, oh, I could motivate or I could say something, you can either verbally say, oh, maybe it sounds like you need a break, or in other ways, basically say, I'll leave it open to you. You can come back. I'm sure you probably
Exactly.
think of a different idea, but if you want me, I'm here.
Yep.
That's
That's exactly it.
it's just
Yep.
basically time. Okay,
Yeah. Give kids the
helpful.
space they need. And sometimes it can take a lot longer than we would like it to or that we think it can. And again, we can model, if your child's not playing with something and you go over and start to play with the blocks, don't invite them over, just do it and see. They might come over. Don't tell them how to do it. You can model it for them or say, would you like to try? Sometimes just sitting with a child, and this is really hard, particularly for women, because we are language centric. Just sitting with your child quiet. Yeah, you're laughing. I can hear you all laughing because it's true. Um, but just sitting with your child and just observing, just watching is very reassuring for the child because you're not interfering. And it's really beneficial. It's one of the first things they teach us in ECE and in teaching is observation skills because you can glean a lot from just watching your kids. Sometimes they'll surprise you with what they're capable of doing if we just leave them alone. But sometimes you can also start to see clues and cues that things may be escalating or, and you can prompt your child and say, "Ooh, looks like you're getting frustrated. Do you need a break?" And that's it. Don't force it. Just, wow, looks like you're getting frustrated. Because that's that emotional vocabulary that we're trying to teach kids, right? So you're narrating not just yourself, but you're narrating them through the day. Boy, it looks like you're having a great time. You're working really hard on that. I can see you concentrating so hard trying to figure this out. Wow. And what that does is it gives the child space to explore and to figure it out without worrying about us getting involved. But it also starts to feed into that self-esteem. When we stop with the wow, we narrate and then we stop and we don't impose our ideas or our wills or our whatever. It gives children the space to start to feel it for themselves. Because if you notice something in a child, the child is like, wow, I'm important enough that mommy or daddy noticed that. That's pretty cool. And the child can then interpret that internally and say, I'm worthy of being noticed.
Hmm.
Right? So again, sometimes it's not so much, we do a lot of directing and we do need to direct, don't get me wrong, we do need to parent our children. But particularly when there are times of exploration and play and things are kind of calm, sometimes parenting really is about sitting back and watching. And I mean, it tends to be the time we run and do laundry, grab a cup of tea, start dinner, and I get we have to do all of that. But you may find every once in a while, if you just sit and just watch, your child might revel in that. Or if it's new, they might look at you and go, "What do you want? What are you doing here?" And if your child says, "Leave me alone," they don't want to be watched, then you respect that because again, there's sometimes they need that space of their own without the unintended pressure that sometimes we can create by hovering over them or watching them and things like that. So you've got to know your child, you've got to know the situation and those kinds of things. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Give them space, give them time, support without taking over, those kinds of things. Because resiliency is about what can I do, not what other people. All of these are about the child, not about you, to be honest. Not to be blunt, but
Yeah.
uh, that's really what it is. It's about giving the child what they need to develop these skills.
Nikki, if I can just add one other thing
Of course.
onto that idea too. One of the suggestions that goes right along with observing that we're taught about so much as an ECE, but kind of segueing off of that is the noticing part. So when you have the opportunity to point out when a child has really started to develop those skills. So maybe the next time you're playing with the blocks, and they do try something different, really noticing that and sharing it with them. Hey, remember last time we got stuck and it felt really frustrating, but this time we tried something different and now we're able to build a really tall tower, right? They're able to pick up on you pointing out the skills that they are developing, right? Which is all part
Right.
of that observation.
And there's a difference between observation and evaluation. And it's a great point, Lisa. When we sort of narrate the story for our kids about their progress, but we have to do it without evaluating. And again, I'll come to the good job thing because whenever I used to bring this up in parenting classes, it would just blow parents' minds and they would go off and think about it for a week and come back even more confused because it's so ingrained in our culture. But we don't want to put our evaluation on it. We just want to notice it and comment about the difference because then kids can start to see their own growth. So basically with children, what we're doing is we're holding up a mirror. So they see themselves based on firstly how we what the mirror looks like when we hold it up. So if we make our children feel like they're failures and they're badly behaved and they're stinky rotten kids because whatever we say or do, then the child holds up that mirror and says, "Okay, this is who I am." Because so our job is to hold up the mirror that says, "Here's who I see. Here's what I see." When they're sharing, "Oh, that was very kind of you." So I'll talk in a minute about the Virtues Project stuff because the Virtues Project has some very, very powerful character building language that we can use with children to help them start to develop a sense of who they are, not what they do, not what they are, who they are becoming inside. What kind of person are they becoming? And it's hugely powerful language. I love the virtues stuff because it uses big words, which is great because then it elicits conversation. Well, what does that mean? When you say I'm compassionate, what does that mean, Mummy? And then you can have a dialogue about compassion. And then you can talk about all the times when your child or somebody else is compassionate so they can get an idea. And when children start to see themselves as compassionate, for example, and there's 52 virtues, one for every week. But when children start to see themselves in that light, when that mirror is held up and it's, wow, I'm kind or I'm compassionate or I'm honest or I'm trustworthy, then I start to behave that way because that's who I am. It's not what I do, it's who I am determines what I do. So when children see themselves in those lights, because we give them feedback on those things, then they start to behave over time in those ways. And you'll see a big shift and you'll see that self-esteem piece really grow as children start to see themselves in these positive lights. So it's a really interesting idea. Um, So just finally with resiliency, what I will say is don't pave the way. Again, we're not curling, and that's probably a bad example with all the things going on in curling with the Olympics, but it's that brushing and that clearing away all of the problems so that children never have to experience it. And we do it with the best of intent. We do it because we want our kids to be happy and we want them to not have to struggle. But struggling is how children grow and develop. So our job is not to eliminate the struggles, but to help children work through those struggles, because life is always going to be a struggle. There's always going to be something that is struggling for them. And we want them to be able to face those things, look at them and say, it's that I can do kind of attitude, right? And that starts when they're very, very young. Firstly, by not eliminating all of the struggles and problems and adversities that they come across in life. Okay, confidence. So confidence is about believing that you can handle challenges, that you can make decisions, and you can sort of deal with the outcomes or whatever happens based on your decisions. So there's a bit of taking accountability and things like that. It's that resilient thinking. Again, these things all intertwine. So even if things don't go just the way you wanted, it's children are like, well, that didn't work, not I'm a failure. So they can separate those two things. They can separate how they feel about themselves, which is the self-esteem, and perhaps something that they thought would work or they would try and it didn't quite work out. Um, and children who are confident can look at those things that didn't work out and go, oh, that didn't work out. Whereas children who lack confidence will be much more negatively impacted by those things. So again, we'll look at the important distinctions first. Being introverted does not mean you're not confident. It means you get your energy from being alone. It means that when you're with a group of people for too long, it takes your energy away. So introvert, extrovert is really about energy. So you can be introverted and very, very confident. So don't mistake those two things. Temporary frustration can make it look like you don't have confidence, but again, it's that emotional regulation piece. Once I can regulate my emotions, that frustration, it's temporary. Then I can go back and feel like, yes, I can do this. So the temporary emotion is temporary. It's not a catastrophic forever, always kind of thinking. And then normal developmental insecurity. So we look at, there are certain periods, particularly in the first year to 18 months, where children are just naturally very, very attached and very what would look like insecure, right? They want to be on you all the time. They want to hug you. They want you to hold them all the time. These are normal developmental things. Sometimes they're situational, sometimes they're developmental. Um, so a lot of self-doubt. So when you start to observe and notice your kids, you can start to listen to the dialogue that they're saying. So role play is a great way to do this. So when you give your children puppets and things like that, sometimes, and don't psychoanalyze them because it doesn't always mean anything. Sometimes they're just working out something they heard in school. But over time, if you keep hearing your child say, I can't do this, I'm stupid, I don't, those kinds of things, those self-doubting comments, then you want to sort of pay attention to those. Because often people generally who don't have a lot of confidence doubt themselves. Sometimes in everything they do. Oh, I can't do that. No, I could never. When I started doing parent education, I thought to myself, I'm not a public speaker. I thought, I can't, what am I doing? I can't do this. Um, but I was able, because I'm fairly resilient, I think, I was able to rationalize and say, okay, so with practice, you'll be able to get better at this and those kinds of things. So temporary self-doubt over something new is perfectly normal. We're looking for patterns here of consistent messaging about I can't do that, those kinds of things. Avoiding challenges. Again, we talked a little bit about that with the resiliency. Avoiding challenges, it can be a very typical first reaction. And again, we want to encourage kids without forcing them to try new things. And they need to see you trying new things and narrating what it was like to try that new thing. I was so scared when I started that job or whatever. So helping kids without telling them what to do. When you tell stories, and I think we've lost some of this art of telling stories, there's no threat when you're telling a story to a child. There's when you use puppet play, for example, when you're trying to help children work things out, children have magical thinking until they're somewhere around 6, 5, 6, 7. So when they get lost in these puppets, they truly do get lost and they truly do believe that these puppets are real. So you can do a lot of teaching and a lot of getting a lot of feedback and things from doing things like role plays and puppet play and those kinds of things. And really just paying attention to what the children are saying in those contexts. It's really fascinating. So again, we're looking for patterns here, right? We're not looking for, you're telling your child to jump in the pool. And the first time, second time, even the third time, child's never been in a pool before and they don't want to do it. That's not a lack of confidence. That's a lack of experience. Um, if the child's been in swimming lessons for a year and is still reluctant to go in the pool, that could be a lack of confidence in the pool and a lack of being comfortable, just as a quick example. Extreme reactions to mistakes, things like, oh, I am so stupid. I can't believe I did. I always do that. So these big reactions to making a mistake. And as parents, we have to temper ourselves sometimes. So, when that glass of milk goes spilling over and you've had a long day and you just cleaned the house and you're like, oh, and sometimes kids' reactions to mistakes can come from what we model. So when we model that, simple mistakes and accidents are the end of the world, children can develop a fear of making a mistake, which causes issues with all three of these things, among other things. But also, it's this reaction. So when a child makes a mistake, then we get this big reaction from the child because that's kind of how they've been exposed to what happens when there's a mistake. That said, if you lose your mind because the third glass of milk has gone flying, couple of things. It's okay to lose it and say, oh, I can't believe this happened again. Take a bit of responsibility, let your child help you clean it up, and then put a lid on the cup. Not in a way that is punitive or makes the child feel bad. Oh, I guess you need a cup with a lid now because you can't manage a regular cup because you're not a big kid. We don't want to do that. But there are nice ways that we can say, you know what? I think I've made a mistake as a parent. And I think maybe we need to put a lid on the cup, or a straw, or something like that. Overdependence, we talked a little bit about this in the previous one, overdependence on adults. So those children that say, I can't, they stand there, and there's a few reasons for this, but I'll use this example. The child who, you said, go get dressed. And the child stands there, and they're capable. That's the first thing. They're capable of getting dressed. And the child stands there at 7:30 in the morning with their arms and feet out, and it's like, I can't get dressed. There's a number of reasons for that. So we have to kind of evaluate on the fly. Is the child looking for connection? Because one of the first things that children do when they're not connected is that resistance thing, right? So they're looking for a way to connect. So if they haven't had a snuggle in the morning and it's been a very stressful, busy morning, you're more likely to get some of those I can't kind of responses. Children can be tired, they can be stressed and pushed and things like that. The other thing sometimes that we do as parents, and it's usually for us, is for example, a 2-year-old struggling to get their shoes on, and 2-year-olds like to do things like me do, I do it. Even when you know that they can't, you have to let them try. And it's very easy to get in there and say, listen, just let me do it. It's easier, it's faster. We're in a rush, we're late for the doctors. I'm going to do it. And that undermines kids' appropriate independence. And it can create this overdependence where over time, if it's done enough, kids will just stop. And it'll just be like, fine, you put those shoes on. So we want to make sure that kids are dependent on us in the right areas and not over dependent on us while still respecting their needs, sometime for a snuggle or just it's a rough day, let me do this for you kind of thing. But dependence can be overdone. And again, the younger the child, the less this is the case, in my view. And again, children need to be dependent on us before they can move into true and real healthy independence. So it's an interest. We probably need to talk way more about this in another session, maybe, this whole idea of independence and dependence and where they're different and what's healthy and what's not. People pleasing, avoiding people, and again, sometimes, particularly the social withdrawal, introverted people can look like they're socially withdrawing. My oldest granddaughter is definitely an introvert, and at her birthday parties, about half an hour, 45 minutes in, she would typically, she was very social, but she would typically disappear. And it's like, where's Jamie gone? And inevitably, we would find her in a quiet room somewhere or up in her room with her little stuffy security toy, just taking a breath, and re-energizing, because she's an introvert. She needs to be alone to energize. So, and she's one of the most confident kids I know and always has been. So that is not a sign of confidence. It's a sign of introverted. So again, you have to get to know your kids. People pleasing, often they're not confident in their own ideas or their own thoughts and feelings about things. So they just kind of adopt what's going on with other people and they just do what other people want. So they don't challenge, they don't question, those kinds of things. And we're in a world now where your kids definitely need to challenge and question everything. And that starts with challenging and questioning, unfortunately, you. Negative self-talk, it's kind of like that self-doubt thing. I can't do this, I'm stupid, those kinds of things. And children who are afraid of evaluation or judgment can also be a low confidence thing. Highly confident kids, again, they can be quiet and thoughtful, they can be outgoing and energetic, they can be athletic, artistic, academic. So confidence isn't about your plight in life or the type of person you are necessarily. It's about your internal dialogue and how secure you feel within yourself. So confidence, again, it's one of those things that comes from within, not from externally. So these kids will typically try new things. Again, it doesn't mean that they're going to try them right away. They may need some time and distance between, but you'll know when kids go into groups, you'll have those children that come in and they're just like in there like a whirling dervish and they're trying out all the toys. And then you've got other kids that are coming in hiding behind their parents' knee. Again, doesn't necessarily mean confidence. It could be just a developmental stage. But highly confident kids will typically be more willing to try new things. Non-confident children have a harder time doing that. They'll still do it sometimes, but it's a bit harder. When they make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. They take that growth kind of mindset and say, oh, well, that didn't work out very well. And it may be after they have their emotional feelings, but then they come back online with their brain and they go, oh, well, that didn't work out very well. Okay, so not the end of the world. They can handle those mistakes and figure out how to fix them. They speak up for themselves. So these are kids who, again, in our culture, sometimes we see this as challenging adults, and it's not. We should be encouraging children to speak up for themselves respectfully, politely. There are ways to do it, but some of us came from generations where children were seen and not heard. And that creates a whole other problem, particularly for the girls, right? And I know some of you at the beginning said you were concerned and thinking about your girls growing up. So we want all people, but maybe a little bit in particular girls with this one, to be able to speak up for themselves, to say what they think, to question authority, to say no, those kinds of things. And that comes with confidence. They're comfortable being themselves, so they're not trying to be like everybody else, which in this day and age with social media and the amount of time that children are spending with each other as opposed to adults, there's a huge phenomenon of kids, adolescents, and even adults wanting to be like everybody else. wanting to look like everybody else, act like everybody else. We want kids to be able to know who they are and be comfortable and confident in who they are and being able to go out into the world and be who they are. And that comes with an idea that, I don't have to, everybody doesn't have to like me. And those kinds of things which often, because of the way we were raised and things like that, are very difficult for us. We want everybody to like us. And sometimes we give that message to our kids. And it's really it's not a rational, reasonable thing to ask of them. But so we want kids to be true to who they are, and to be able to go out into the world and say, this is who I am. If you don't like me, move on. If you like me, let's talk. They can take responsibility. Some of this comes from not fearing consequences. And that's not to say there shouldn't be consequences, but I question the idea that children need to be afraid when there's a consequence. Consequences are supposed to teach. And you can't actually learn when you're in a state of fear. The two parts of the brain don't work together. So we want kids to acknowledge when they've made a mistake, to right the wrong. Lisa and I were talking a little earlier about the idea of forcing kids to say they're sorry. That's not taking responsibility. That's doing something because somebody else has told you to do it. We want kids to apologize in whatever way is appropriate for them from the heart. So when we say to a kid, force them to say you're sorry, what you'll get is kids going, sorry, and then they walk off. And they didn't feel anything. They didn't feel sorry. They didn't feel empathy. They didn't even look at the other child and realize what they'd done. They just did what they were told to do to get out of trouble. So we want to give kids some time and space and some ideas on how you might be able to right this wrong. So if you hit your friend, even if it was by accident, they're hurt. How are you going to make that person feel better? So rather than forcing, say you're sorry, we want kids to be authentic, to be themselves. So maybe you have a very artistic child that says, you know what, I think I'll draw them a picture. Great. It comes from the heart. Other kids will say, I'm going to go over and give them a hug. Okay, you need to ask. You just hurt them. You need to ask them if they want a hug before you go in there, but give it a shot. I'm going to write them a note. I'm going to share my toys. So there's lots of ways that children can take responsibility and make up that are not necessarily what we might do. So we want to give kids the breadth and the space to come up with their own ideas and take that responsibility. It feels safer, it's authentic, it gives kids confidence to say, I created a problem and I fixed it. And that's a huge piece of confidence, is I created a problem or I have a problem, I can fix it. And again, with young children, it doesn't mean that you don't, that you're not there to support them, but it's really you want your children to ask you. So you say, do you need my help? I've got a couple of ideas. Do you want to hear them rather than just imposing your ideas on them? So there's ways to support kids respectfully that still gives them that space to feel like they've done it themselves. They're persistent. This can be a temperament trait. So much to your dismay, if you have a persistent child, because they will persist through everything. So they can be a temperament trait. So children on the opposite end of that are not persistent. So they give up quickly, they change quickly, they don't tend to finish things often. So that's not necessarily a confidence thing as much as it can be a temperament thing. So again, you got to know your kids. But that whole mindset, that growth mindset, I can do this, I can try again. If it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. So that persistence piece. And you can model that a lot, even if you have to fake it a little bit. Sometimes we have to fake our situations a little bit for the benefits of the stories we tell our kids. Pretend you can't open that jar. Oh, do a little dramatic acting, just for the sake of the story. But non-confident kids or highly confident kids are often able to persist and keep trying something. Even if it's not exactly at the same time, they get their emotions in check, they try again. And they can accept success and failure relatively calmly. And again, this comes with age. So when you've got a young child, calmly is not always a reasonable expectation, um, because young children don't have the brain doesn't integrate. So that thinking brain and that emotional brain don't integrate so that you can have the two at the same time until kids are between 5 and 7. So when you've got a child under those ages, or you've got a highly intense child, calmly isn't in the repertoire. So it's can they do it over time? Can they, after the emotions are done, can they come back calmly and talk about it and those kinds of things? So with young children, it might look like that rather than success and failure calmly in the moment. They do have to have those feelings first and get those out of the way, and then the other part of the brain can fire up. Things we can do. Emotional safety. So again, we don't want to overreact to things. We want to make sure we're taking care of ourselves as parents. We want to make sure we're tuned into our own emotional states, and that we're creating a safe, secure, calm, respite kind of environment for our kids to have their feelings. And this can be hard. When children are having a tantrum, the last thing you want to do is just like deal with this. It's just like, just stop it. And we can talk about this more in the next session when we talk about behavior. But once a tantrum has started, it's like a freight train. You got to ride it. You can't stop a tantrum once it's started. There are ways to kind of circumvent it, maybe. But once it's started, you just kind of have to ride it out. So, but we want to make sure that kids have all those feelings and feel safe to have them. So if we berate them and we yell at them or we shame them, those kinds of things make them feel like some feelings are good and some feelings are not good, then we don't create that safety. And confidence, like everything else, there's an emotional response to things, and confidence is developed out of having those emotions and then figuring out how to deal with them. Independence, we've talked a little bit about. Let them try things before you step in. Even if it's easier and faster for you to do it, it's important for children to get the space to try things themselves. Because if they can't, then how can they become confident that they can do it? And there's an underlying message when we do things for kids that they can do for themselves. There's an underlying message that says, I don't think you can do this, or you don't do it properly, or you don't do it right. Like when we go in and remake a bed that a child has made, basically it says, you didn't do it right. So those kinds of things we want to encourage that independence where it's appropriate. Again, your 3-year-old is not going to make dinner, but your 3-year-old might be able to help you. They might be able to stir something or whatever. And we want to give kids the ability to struggle. And this is one of the hardest things in parenting is letting kids struggle through something when we know perfectly well how to do it, but they don't. And how are they going to learn if we do it for them always? Praise effort. Again, as I get into school, particularly, this is important. So it's again the journey. You worked really hard on that. You're trying, so I can see you're trying your very best. And we kind of underplay the evaluation piece. I know our school system has an evaluation structure, and it is what it is. But my grandson, who's 6, he's in grade 1. This is his first half a year in grade 1, and his teacher has sent a preemptive note to my daughter saying, yeah, Noah's going to get a D in reading and language. And it's like, what? He's 6. So they have their structure, they have their, the things they have to do, and I totally understand that system. But I said to my daughter, I said, you don't even talk about that. You talk about the reading journey and how far, to Lisa's point about, noticing how far he's come. Like when you started grade 1, you couldn't read a word, and now you're reading books. And it's not about the evaluation of the school. They have to do that. It's fine. But our job as parents is to buffer some of that stuff and help kids see the other side of that, which sometimes teachers don't see. That is the effort and the journey to get as far as they've come, even if it's not good enough to get whatever grade it is that people think they're supposed to get. So it's about the effort. It's not about the end result. Because when we focus on the end result and kids can't get there, because the end result often is not, it's subjective, not objective. So different teachers or different coaches or even different parents will attribute different marks or different expectations to something. So when a child can't meet the expectation over and over again, particularly, then they stop trying. So, but if you keep encouraging the journey, you work so hard and you try and, you're persistent and all of those virtues language things that I talked about, then the child isn't so focused on the end result. They're focused on who they are and how they worked really hard to get there. And, hard work will get you where you need to go at some point. Normalizing mistakes. We sometimes inadvertently make kids think mistakes are the end of the world. And we need to take a stance that says mistakes are the only way you learn. So if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying, you're not risking, you're not struggling, you're not confident. If kids are scared to make mistakes, then they're lacking the confidence to be wrong. And those messages can come from all sorts of different places in our culture. So we want to make sure that kids know we all make mistakes. So again, pointing out some of your fatal flaws, not big ones, just little ones. And kids make a mistake and it's like, oh, well, what do you think you can do next time? Those kinds of things, that again, that growth mindset. Give them a voice. So those conversations, that safe place where kids can express themselves freely without judgment, without somebody correcting them or saying, no, you don't feel like that, or no, that's wrong. Respecting their voice. And again, it's a safety factor. We want kids to be able to use their voice in positive as well as challenging times. If something's happening to them that they don't like, we want them to be able to say, no, I don't like that. And when we silence that voice because we don't like what we hear, then we silence the child. Avoid comparison. If you've got more than one child, this is not easy to do. Why can't you? And I've seen it done. My kids all went to the same school. So my firstborn was a high achiever. My secondborn, not so much. My thirdborn was a boy, two girls and a boy. So they were very different children, and they all had the same teachers. And there were teachers that expected the same things from my second and third that they got from my first. And it's like, but they're different children. Um, so we want to make sure that we're not saying, well, Johnny does this. Why can't you be more like Susie? Those kinds of things. Everybody has their gifts. Everybody has their, the things they're good at and the things they're not. So we want to try and avoid comparisons, not just with siblings, but with friends and other people too. And modeling confidence in yourself. And we've talked about this with the other one. We want to, children copy more than they listen. So if you say you're terrible at everything, then they learn that that's a normal way to think about yourself. So when we're doing things and we're talking and we're narrating, we want to understand that our children, even if they don't seem to be listening, are listening. They are there, they're hanging out, they're taking it all in, consciously and unconsciously. So we want to model confidence and show them what it looks like to be confident as much as we can. And all of this modeling is not to say you're not going to make mistakes, you're not going to have bad days. We're human. So nobody's expecting 100% in anything parenting. And in fact, that doesn't model any of these things when when everything is hunky-dory. There's more learning for kids when we're struggling too. And we don't want to dump adult problems on kids. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about some of the everyday things that can challenge us. I don't want to get up today. It was so hard to get up this morning. Those kinds of things. And I knew I was going to get a snuggle from you, so that helped me to get up. And so those kinds of things, just talking through things so that kids know what they're thinking is normal, and you can offer, again, suggestions and ideas that aren't directed at them, so you don't get the counter will. It's storytelling, so it's less threatening for them to hear it like that. Okay.
Nikki, two things.
Yeah.
We've got an awesome question in the chat. So Estefania, I'm wondering, do you want to hop on the mic and maybe just kind of share a little bit about what you were mentioning in the chat? And then I'm also just conscious of the time too. So we're about 20 after 2 at this point.
Okay. So I will whip through the self-esteem.
Okay, my question is more about like what you mentioned, like us as a parent, we don't want your child like feel stronger, like we are most of the time like want to do things for them, especially in rush time, like we need to get on time to the childcare or we have an appointment,
Right.
and we don't want like be okay. I can do this. You cannot do this. Like we know they can, but we are rushing in that moment, running out of time.
That's every parent's morning struggle. Um, so it's like I say, I'm not lying. It happens in every household. If you opened all the doors at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, you would see a different variety or a different level of this kind of thing happening in just about everybody's house. So there's a couple of things. One is to allow enough time because kids have no sense of time. So when you say we're in a hurry or we're late, it's a concept that they don't quite understand yet. Children don't understand time until I think they're 8-ish. So when we start to use time as a construct, they don't understand it. So that's the first thing. We're using a construct that they just don't get. Second, it's that coercion, it's that counter will thing. The harder we push, the more we rush, the more resistant they become. And it's an instinct, it's not a choice. So we want to back off. If we see a child struggling to keep up, instead of pushing harder, we want to back off. We want to go and say, you know what? I'm going to go pack your lunch. You get your shoes on. We want to talk with our kids about what can we do to make mornings smoother? Because believe it or not, children don't like mornings like this either. So it's a great way to sit down at a dinner table and say, listen, I am finding mornings really, really hard. And we're not blaming the kids. We're saying that it's tough to get out in the morning. We're all so rushed and we're tired and we seem to have so much to do. Anybody got any ideas what we can do to make this go better? When children come up with solutions to the problems, they're much more inclined to follow them. So we want to be able to have that dialogue. Sometimes visuals, kids can't hold things sometimes in their memory, especially when they're stressed. So sometimes a picture, calendar, whatever you want, a list of things in picture form, because they can't read, that says, here's the things we do. You can make it a little interactive, put little squares with it, with Velcro or something, and they can take it off and put it in the envelope or whatever. You can choose. I'm not a big fan of reward systems, but that's a personal choice for families. Um, maybe at the end of the week, if we've had 3 good days, don't ever try for perfection. If we've had 3 decent days, maybe we have a pizza party on Friday night, something like that as like family time, or a special activity as opposed to a toy or a thing. Um, so so there are ways, but the first thing we have to do is understand what's going on with the behavior. And I'll talk about this in March. There's always an underlying cause for every single behavior you see in your children. So what is it? Is it stress? Is it rushed? Is it tired? Is it lack of connection? If we get our kids up by throwing on the lights, throwing open the window, taking off the covers and say, okay, get dressed, and then you leave to go and do the other stuff you have to do, there's no connection there. So children are inclined and wired to resist when the attachment relationship is disconnected. And they've disconnected overnight because they're not with you. So sometimes a quick snuggle, a gentle waking, I can't wait till tonight when we can have, story time, whatever, a story in the morning, something that just brings the two of you back together can go a huge way in getting cooperation with your children. And the other thing is often we put too much on their plate. There's too much to do in the morning for a small child to do on his own. So often, if you want them to brush their teeth, sometimes you have to do it with them. And sometimes you just have to, for lack of a better word, give in to some of these things because fighting them takes longer. So if you're under a time crunch, you've got to figure out how to work with the child without expecting too much independence at a time where sometimes the independence is not coming because there's other things going on with the child. So there's a few things you might want to try and just see whether any of those work. Come back in March and report back. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okie doke. All right. In the interest of time, we're going to whip through the self-esteem thing. A lot of it has already been covered with the other two, so I will try not to be redundant. Self-esteem is really about how the child sees themselves. So it's a much deeper internal knowing. It's not a doing, it's not a I can do this. It's a sense of self. And I will really, really encourage you to look at the Virtues Project stuff. I will bring some of the cards and things to the next presentation. But if you look at the Virtues Project, there's language again there that really helps children discover and feel like who they are. It's not what they do, it's who they are. So when you think about your child in 30 years, what kind of person do you want them to be? Not what do they do. You don't want them to be successful. You don't want them to be doctors and lawyers, although those may be nice things for you to want. What kind of human being do you want them to be? Do you want them to be kind and compassionate and honest and trustworthy? And again, there's 52 of these virtues, and they're listed on the virtues website. When children start to see themselves as those things, they start to behave in those ways. So self-esteem develops over time. It's built. We're not born necessarily with good self-esteem, and very similar things. When we look at how it shows up, very, very similar things to some of the other points that we've talked about. They're avoiding, they're very sensitive mistakes, they talk poorly about themselves, they please, they're perfectionists, can be. They're clingy or they withdraw, they act out, lots of reasons for acting out. Often compare themselves to others to sort of confirm their bias. So if they see themselves as bad people or whatever, fill in the blank for the word, they will compare themselves to others, and there's a confirmation bias. So they will look at things that confirm what they believe. So we want to be aware of that as well. And children can feel confident socially and feel good about themselves in some situations and not others. So this is a bit of a moving target when they're young. We want good self-esteem develops over time. Again, very similar things from the other two. They speak about themselves in a balanced way. They can handle feedback. They're comfortable in themselves. They're independent in a healthy way. They can have things like disappointment and frustration and recover from those things. We want to think about, how do kids think about themselves? Are they capable and worthy? So it's a much deeper knowing than the other two. It is not about arrogance. I'm the best. That's not what high self-esteem is. Actually, arrogance and bragging can often be signs of a very low confidence level, which on the surface looks like they're very confident, but if you really dig down, arrogance and bragging is often very much a lack of confidence and certainly a lack of self-esteem. Self-esteem tends to be just, it's a quiet knowing of who you are. And again, children are children. It takes time to develop. Very similar things: unconditional love and acceptance, age-appropriate independence. We'll talk more about that in the next one, because sometimes our behavior issues that we have with our kids are around expectations and dependence and independence. Focusing on efforts, not outcomes. We've talked about that one. Emotional awareness, we've talked about. Clear boundaries and consistent expectations. Again, kids function much better when there's clear boundaries, consistent expectations, and consistent consequences. So none of this is about not having consequences for children. We can correct children and teach children, which is what discipline means, to teach, without attacking who they are. So we need to be able to separate what they've done and help them separate what they've done from who they are, because they're two very different things. We need to give kids opportunity to struggle, to have success. Mastery takes 10,000 hours on average. So when we think about what we're expecting children to know and learn and what time frame we're expecting them to learn it in, it can take 10 up to, they say it's 10,000 hours to master something. So kids have lots and lots of time and need lots and lots of time to make mistakes and figure things out before they're masters of anything. Modeling, avoiding comparison, because that creates self-doubt. It's like, am I good as that person? Am I not? So good kids with good self-esteem, people with good self-esteem can look at somebody else and say, you know, I think this or I feel that, or I look at that person and I can still feel good about myself. The social stuff is still important without losing the context of family. Family is immensely important for a very long time. So we want to be very, very selective and cautious about the social lives of our kids. We can't let kids raise each other and sort of step back out of the picture. They still need kids spend a lot of time with other kids. Kids need as much time as they can get with their families. So there needs to be some balance there between social lives and family life. And then maintaining open communication. Again, we want to ask those open-ended questions like, what was hard today? Because what that does is opens the door for the child to say, this was hard. And then you can explore with them, well, how did you manage to get it done? Or how did you manage to make progress? Or how did you manage to, and talking about when we say to kids, I'm so proud of you, there's certainly a place for that. But when we say to a child, how proud are you of yourself? Right? So we're helping kids turn that inward in a healthy way and reflect back on, yeah, I'm so proud of myself. And then you can say, I'm so proud of you too. Because when we say, I'm so proud of you first, sometimes it can feel like an evaluation and a judgment. Then the child has no space or room to come up with their own sense of pride over their accomplishment. Um, so I was going to chat about the Alfie Kohn good job thing, but I'll do that the discipline, the behavior one, because it fits in there as well. I'll send an article out. There's an article called 5 Reasons to Stop Saying Good Job. And like I say, whenever I used to bring it up in a class, it had parents reeling because we all do it. And I mean, I still do it. When we say good job, we rob kids of a few things. And we all do it. It's just a normal part of how we interact and what we say. But he's a bit of a disruptor, to use that term that everybody uses now, long before his time. This article was written in 2001. And he was very much a school disruptor. He challenged schools a lot, but then he dabbled in parenting a little bit. So he wrote a book called Unconditional Parenting. So I'll send Lisa the article and then she can forward it on to you guys, and just for fun you can read it and see what it says about what some of the drawbacks could be for saying good job to our kids too much. Just to challenge your thinking a little bit. So in conclusion, resiliency is learned, confidence is built, and self-esteem is developed. So all of these things take time, they take experience, they take support, all those kinds of things. They evolve as children interact with their families and the world. They are deeply connected. These 3 things are deeply interconnected, and very dependent on each other. As you can see, when we talked about things, there was a lot of similarities and a lot of things that were the same and sort of were appropriate across all 3 areas. But they are really the foundation of healthy social emotional development and a huge protection from some of the mental health stuff challenges that we are seeing in younger and younger children. Children who have these things developed tend not to be as susceptible to some of the mental health challenges that the children who don't have these things struggle with. Oh, you always remember you're braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. I love Winnie the Pooh wisdom. All right.
I agree. That's one of my favorite quotes there.
What's that?
I agree. That's one of my favorite quotes that you just ended there with.
Her wisdom is awesome.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much, Nikki. You just have such a wonderful way of explaining things.
Well, thank you.
And I definitely believe that you delivered. This is something that's so applicable, no matter what age our children are, right? It's something that kind of we can continue to revisit, and a
Even as
lot of
adults.
Exactly.
We can still, as adults, we can still develop these skills if we don't have them in ourselves. It's hard to
Yeah,
teach children things you don't have yourself. So if you
right.
struggle with these areas, work on yourself first. And it is possible. It's never too late.
It's never too late. And just how, what you were explaining as well before about how we're holding a mirror up to our child, I really believe that they're holding mirrors up to us as well, too. And,
Absolutely.
we've been gifted this opportunity to do better and bring them along with us in that journey. So thank you so much. I love, Nikki, that you did a little teaser for our next workshop that's coming up. So hopefully everybody will be able to join us there as well too. I've put it in the chat. I am going to stop the recording, but I did want to ask if anybody had any questions.